Thank you so much, Dan. Welcome back, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Some of you have joined us for the whole series. Some of you are just joining us. We're so excited for tonight. There is not too much you have to do to keep things orderly, except we would love for you to keep throwing questions at us. You have come up with some great questions so far, and let's keep that Q&A box flowing. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce our co-host to you. Dr. Heidi Hutner is an associate professor at Stony Brook University. She writes about environmental issues, and currently she's working on a documentary, Accidents Can Happen, The Women of 3 Mile Island, as well as a companion book of the same name. Her writing appears in New York Times, Ms. Mag, Long Reads, PRI, Ion, Yes, Dame, and others. She has books and chapters in books with Oxford UP, UVA, and more. And she hosts the webisode Coffee with H×2, a sustainability interview series. Don't miss her TEDx, Eco-Feminism and Eco-Grief. And Dennis Yerry is an Iroquois musician, composer, and environmentalist. For many years, he was the director of the Native Day of Thanksgiving at the Cathedral of St. John the Divine in New York. And he's worked on many projects in film, television, and theater. He is currently the musical director of Unto These Hills in Cherokee, North Carolina, and has continued to use his music as a conduit to aid Native American and environmental issues. I'll turn it over to our co-hosts.
Thanks so much, Rivka. And Dennis and I are really excited tonight. This is a issue and a topic, and our speakers are all really wonderful, are dear to me, and the topic is dear to me, and I'm just really excited to be talking to everyone. We will start with Gina because of a few different reasons. One is that with her father's historical involvement with this issue, we're going to kind of move back and from the past and move to the present, and then we'll go second to Ardeth, and then we will talk more fluidly with both. Again, feel free to post your questions as we're talking. We always check the questions and try to bring them into our discussion. I would like to introduce both of them. They're just amazing people and remarkable to have them on with us. And so thank you, Gina, and thank you, Ardeth, for being with us. I want to give you a little background about Gina. She was born and raised in New York City. Gina Belafonte has spent her life in the arenas of entertainment and activism where her professional work thrives today. As the youngest child of Julie and Harry Belafonte, whose impact in these fields is among the most influential and progressive in the world, Gina's passions comes as no surprise. Gina was the lead producer on the internationally acclaimed documentary film Sing Your Song, exploring the extraordinary life and legacy of Harry Belafonte. That was selected as the opening film for the Sundance Film Festival in 2011. After many years working as an actress in New York City with several off-Broadway and touring companies like the National Shakespeare Company and the Mirror Repertory Company in New York City under the artistic direction of John Strasberg, alongside greats such as Geraldine Page, F. Murray Abraham, Anne Jackson, and Elizabeth Franz, a series of opportunities to work in film and television moved her to Hollywood, where she appeared in several guest starring roles. And landed a television series called The Commish. Commish? I'm not sure how you pronounce that.
The Commish.
The Commish.
Like the commissioner.
Oh, excuse me. I apologies for the mispronunciation. After 2 formative years on screen with the series, her lifelong passion for stage production ultimately led her to produce theater in Los Angeles. Gina's technical expertise and insight into the world of film and television production were developed while working with Paula Weinstein and Barry Levinson at Baltimore Spring Creek Warner Brothers. After becoming a mother, Gina followed her early childhood environment by immersing herself in activism. Collaborating with leading gang interventionist Bo Taylor, Gina developed a deeper understanding of gang culture by working in the California prison system, and co-founded a nonprofit organization called the Gathering for Justice. The multicultural, multi-generational organization focuses on youth incarceration and the criminalization of poverty. Currently sits on the board of Second Call, a community-based organization designed to save lives by reducing violence and assisting in the personal development of high-risk individuals, proven offenders, ex-felons, parolees, and others who society disregards, and the internationally acclaimed Actors Gang Theater, founded by Tim Robbins. Today, Gina lives in LA and New York and is working with diverse artists, activists, and organizations worldwide to promote cultural and civic engagement in the 21st century. Ms. Belafonte is currently involved in many artistic ventures, such as producing a documentary film called Another Night in the Free World that explores the lives of 3 young women activists, their struggles and challenges, and the difference they are making in the world, developing alongside her father with Martin Scorsese, and a television miniseries about the colonization of the Congo by King Leopold II, and the staged version of the Grammy-nominated 6-CD box set anthology of Black music, The Long Road to Freedom. She and her father are the executive producers of Lyrics from Lockdown, a hip-hop theater, multimedia production addressing the impact of wrongful imprisonment and mass incarceration. Driven by her passion for the arts and activism, Gina reflects, after we finished Sing Your Song, I knew then, as long as my dad had an idea, I would do whatever I could to help bring those ideas to fruition, continue the best of my elders' traditions, and preserve our family's legacy. So, as we're starting with Gina, I will save the bio for Ardeth for when we move to Ardeth. But Gina, I just want to say your work is just so interesting and so remarkable, and I love the intergenerational aspect of it. And for me, my parents were activists, and your dad was sort of this inspirational figure in my home, and that was one of the reasons, in addition to all that you're doing, I felt it was so important for you to join us tonight as we talk about nuclear weapons, nuclear issues, and the intersection of gender and race. It seems to me that your history, your work, your family's work is so crucial to all of this. And I'm just excited to hear what you have to say. Before we started, I mentioned it was a film that I had seen with your dad, that The World, the Flesh, and the Devil, which is an amazing film about, a nuclear apocalypse. And integral to it is race. It's like central into the film, and you mentioned a really interesting point about it, which you can elaborate on. But if you would talk to us a little bit about that history and how your dad's work influenced you and your understanding of nuclear issues and all of those intersections.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I appreciate the opportunity to talk with you all and to share some of my history and legacy. One thing I will make note of, too, in that very long bio you read of me, a little embarrassing, but is that currently I am the executive director of a nonprofit organization called sankofa.org, SANKOFA.org. And that is also founded by my father. And Sankofa is a Ghanaian word that means go back and get it. And so much of my work is about not only exploring the intergenerational alliances that we can build together, but also the symbol of the Sankofa is a bird in mid-flight with its head turned back and beak open, retrieving an egg from midair, symbolizing we need to go back and retrieve what we have left behind. We need to retrieve our past. We need to retrieve our youth. We need to retrieve our history in order to move forward. And so much of the work that I do today is informed deeply by the work of many people, including my father, who have consistently shown up for the liberation of all of our people, but specifically Black and brown people in marginalized communities. And I will say, as it relates to the nuclear conversation, while that is a global issue, I believe that in the places where we find many of the nuclear stations here in the United States, surrounding those stations, the communities that are the closest are those that are most disenfranchised. You won't see like a nuclear power station in the middle of Beverly Hills, for instance. So I think the placement of some of these spaces and some of the things that our major companies and government choose to do often disenfranchise our people of color, but we also use the history in order to inform us for the present and moving forward. So with that said, yes, my father and my mother both were very political people my whole entire life. I was integrated into politics and entertainment since I'm a very, very young girl, because I was born into it, basically. And Sankofa is an organization that uses the power of the arts as an opportunity to educate and inform the public on very pressing and specific issues. And so I talk about that because the way in which I was introduced to the nuclear problem, shall we say, whether it was war or otherwise, was through a group in the 80s called PAND International. And that stood for Performers and Artists for Nuclear Disarmament. And like the way my parents often worked with me, that they would introduce me to an event, or they would bring me to a specific space or place, and they didn't have any demand on me, but they would introduce me to the environment and the space and what people were talking about. And that gave me a good idea and a way in to just listen and to see if it would be something that I would, gravitate toward. Well, this was one of them. And on my a graduation gift, I had the honor of being gifted an opportunity to go to Europe. And during that time, we met with folks and were able to, hold on for 1 second. I'm so sorry. I'm sorry. So I was able to be introduced to a group that was creating an event for performers and artists for nuclear disarmament. And so I became the stage manager of the event. And this event, I had no idea who was going to participate. It was in a very small town of Montepulciano in the hills of Tuscany. But it brought together artists like Marcel Marceau and Bibi Andersson and my father and other artists of that period in the 80s. And I was just blown away by how they would come with their international celebrity and come to this small town and have a deep conversation with other people that would come from all over the region to talk about nuclear disarmament. And I began to really watch closely at the sort of things that my father was doing around nuclear disarmament. Of course, as I don't know, but many people do know that one of the largest demonstrations since World War II, because technically in Germany you were not allowed to gather in mass collection after World War II. And this was the largest demonstration of over 300,000 people in Germany that my father helped coordinate and was the sort of MC for, that Coretta Scott King came to speak to. And it was a very moving and powerful demonstration. And then I'll add that the movie that you were talking about, The World of Flesh and the Devil, is a movie that is about, was supposed to be a movie about the survival of two people left on Earth, a black man and a white woman. And the script was written. And when the Hollywood studio saw that script, they felt that there would be a problem having a black man and a black woman be the only two people left on Earth, and what that would imply in terms of, shall we say, regenerating life on the planet. And so they introduced another character that was a white man. So there's always this very strange kind of thing at the end when you see the three of them sort of walk off, because for the most part, in those days, a black man wasn't able to touch a white woman, especially on screen. And they were able to get through that because he did touch her, but there was basically a love relationship happening, but there was no way for them to actually show it. There is a scene where he cuts her hair, and there's other things that sort of allude to the relationship, but they were not able to show it.
That's so interesting, because at around the same time, there was a movie that was also about nuclear apocalypse, and there was also one. It was called Five, and there were 5 characters, and one of the characters was a black man. And there's the tension throughout the movie is over who will get the woman. There's 1 woman and 3 men, and it's sort of like they each die off, but who's left? A white guy. And it seemed to me like there was, with both of those movies, there's this strange conflation of the end of the world is coming. What's going to happen to the white race? That's my take on it. Like there's a like here the world is afraid of nuclear apocalypse post World War II, right after Hiroshima.
Sure.
And there's this incredible fear, you know, at the time in the U.S. and around the world, with the Cold War and the accumulation of all these weapons. People were really afraid, you know, duck and cover and everything. And so it's so interesting to me that in that apex and that fear of the end, what are they also afraid of? What's going to happen? Will we reproduce white people if we, you know, so it seems like a very interesting moment in it. And it's also so interesting because people don't realize that there was a very strong union between civil rights activism and anti-nuclear activism at that
Yes,
time.
because there was a strong alliance, especially toward the end of Dr. King's life. There was a strong alliance around the issues of race and the war, because, well, certainly after World War II, what we found was that many of the soldiers that returned home that were African American or even other races, they came after fighting for liberation of the Jews in Europe. They came home to a place where they didn't have the vote, and they were constantly discriminated against. And regardless of their rank in the military, there was no regard for them still really as full human beings in participating in civic activity. So there's always been an alliance. And what's interesting is that the civil rights movement has always had an alliance with just about every other movement. It's had an alliance with the women's empowerment movement. It's had an alliance with the anti-war movement. It's had an alliance with the peace movement. Where we find a lot of the disconnect is often those movements don't end up showing up in large numbers until now, really, in the support of Black lives.
So Gina, if you, in bringing up Black Lives Matter, that's good, because we bring it into a contemporary setting for us now. And I'm curious about a couple things. So one thing I'm curious about is, because you're in the arts, I'm in the arts, and I feel like it's really, really important for people in the arts, whether they're poets or whether they're performers, musicians, you know, filmmakers or whatever. How do you feel like our role is in sustaining this movement? I feel like I hear a lot about, you know, well, we had all these marches, we have all these marches, and every time we have these peaks where something happens and it brings everybody out and everybody protests, everybody, you know, says their voice, everybody agrees we need to do something, but then nothing happens, or a lot less happens than we want. And so how can artists and performers work to sustain this movement that's happening now?
Sure. Well, we're of the belief that artists are the gatekeepers of truth. We're civilization's radical voice. And so we need to keep singing, we need to keep performing, we need to keep writing, we need to keep painting, we need to keep dancing, we need to keep pushing forward the agenda. But what's very important is for us to really listen to the grassroots and to listen to what the demands are of the people who are most impacted by any issue, and to really hear from them and not superimpose upon anyone what we think is the best way for something to be or not be. And in many cases, the artist is the most impacted. I mean, arts are the first thing to be defunded. Many artists who have very radical voices are silenced. And so we have to figure out ways in which to ensure that the message doesn't get lost in the mayhem. And so we need to use, one, certainly the power of celebrity. They have a megaphone, they have a lot of fan base, and we need to continue to integrate and encourage celebrities to have a deeper understanding of what the demands are and what the issues are. Because the other thing about celebrity is that they don't want to look stupid. And so a lot of them disengage because they don't have a deep understanding of the issue or the strategy on how to move forward. The other, I would say, for artists is that the artists need to be included in some of these policy tables. We need to be included in boardrooms, and our way and process of thinking and engaging needs to be included in a lot of the decision making. And so I think that artists need to continue to demand space and claim space and come up with innovative ideas and ways in which to create policy. and to make sure that our voices are heard. And it's not just about arts policy. It's what is an artist's perspective and a point of view around nuclear war or nuclear technology? What is an artist's perspective around mass incarceration? What is an artist's perspective around equity and income disparity? So I think that artists, some are very smart and some are very vocal, but a lot of them feel like all they want to do is just, let the other people speak. But I think it's important for artists to step up and step forward, and many of them have. And more recently, we can see in the legacy of not only my father, but of Paul Robeson and Marian Anderson and James Baldwin and so many other artists throughout history who have used their platform and the power of their pen and voice to articulate in ways that allow the viewer or I'll say the viewer, to let their hearts open, let their minds open, because it's very different from like a textbook, or it's very different from just a lecture, but art has a way of opening hearts and minds. And so the arts play a critical role, as they always have since the beginning of time, since there were cave drawings. When we look at religion, for instance, art played the hugest role as a marketing tool. All those buildings that were created for putting religion forward, all of the stained glass, all of the Bible writings, those are all stories, and they're written by artists. Granted, probably in some cases dictated at knife point, but nonetheless, those are artist creations. And then the last thing I will say about that is that, as it relates to the United States in particular, but I would say even in other places in the world, until we have a real conversation around the genocide of Native American people and stolen bodies for profit around slavery in this country, we're always really skirting around issues and not having the deep dive and the real conversations that we need to be having. We need to be accountable. We need to have a reconciliation. We need to also look at this new period, I think, that we're in as an opportunity for reconstruction, to reimagine what the world could actually be like if there was real equity. And that's hard to imagine in a capitalist society. And I think we need the artists to help imagine what that would look like, whether it's performing artists or tech artists, architects, whatever art form. Mm-hmm. You're on mute, honey. We can't hear you, Heidi.
I wanted to apologize for not mentioning Sankofa. I meant to. Anyhow, my deep apologies. And I also wanted to ask you if you would talk a little bit about Daughters of the Movement, which is something I know you're very involved with and is very powerful work. And if you just like to share about that, and if you see connections to any of the issues tonight with that.
Sorry, I have a dog that's going to be barking a little bit, but I'll talk over my dog. So Daughters of the Movement is a collective of young women, or maybe not so young, but they feel young to me because we all grew up together, a lot of us. It is the daughter of Malcolm X and Dr. Betty Shabazz. It is the daughter of Bill Lynch. It is the daughter of Diane Carroll and Monty Kaye. It is the daughter of Ossie Davis and Ruby Dee. It is the daughter of Al Sharpton, and it is the granddaughter of a man by the name of Percy Sutton and myself, the daughter of Harry and Julie Belafonte. And we came together really to create a sisterhood, a space and a place where we could talk about stuff that we couldn't always talk about amongst other people. Whether it related to just being Black women together, or whether it was about sort of the rarefied air that we've all been given the gift to be subjected to. Many of us moved in circles as young people around civil rights leaders that are in our history books, and a lot of the ways in which our families came together or moved through the world was in deep, deep strategy with each other and in deep, deep coordination. And so we have sort of a very interesting perspective on certain things and have lived a kind of lifestyle that has been sort of deeply protected in certain ways, but also overly exposed in other ways, and in some very horrific ways, whether it's assassinations or murders or collective strategies on seeing fellow members of our community be alienated or so we formed this group, and we are multi-generational, and we have I think a lot to offer because we have different perspectives from the different families that we come from. We're different ages, we have different approaches, and while all of our parents or grandparents knew each other or literally worked together around the civil rights movement, we have now come together in this modern moment to do the same and to use our collective power and our collective voice to help educate young women and young men around those legacies and how they can inform a way forward.
I encourage everyone to listen in when you all are, I think you may have taken a pause now, but you're sort of regularly speaking both publicly before COVID, but also you have been doing Zoom. So that's really powerful. Something came to my mind, and I'd like to kind of address both you and Ardeth on this issue. And it's the word annihilation. And Ardeth, I just want to quickly introduce, and we can you'll tell us more about you soon, but I wanted to maybe both of you talk about this question of, so Ardeth is a sister with she's a Dominican nun, and she's been at anti-nuclear activism forever. I've had the wonderful opportunity of marching with her at the Pentagon in the early dawn in the dark and freezing cold. I've never been so cold. And it was amazing to behold Ardeth talking incredibly gently to people who were going to work, and saying to them, you'd better prepare for a new job because there's going to be a hospital here soon. And they were looking at her in a very puzzled way, but it was a very kind of interesting way of addressing that the building of violence, right? And that this needs to be a place of healing, not a place of murder. And also you wanted to carry this treaty, which we'll talk about in a little bit, that a group ICANN actually won the Nobel Peace Prize for, and Ardeth is one of those winners for the 2017 Treaty to Abolish Nuclear Weapons at the UN. And I was fortunate to be there at the signing, a remarkable event. And we'll get into that in a little bit. But this word, and Ardeth is also a character on Orange is the New Black. So she spent a lot of time in prison and just an amazing human being, and really honored to have you. But the word annihilation comes to mind, because that is what nuclear war will mean to the world. And this concept seems to me to be something that Native American people can understand, and the Black community can understand, and any kind of, and I don't mean to just level here and say it's all the same, but there's a sense of, perhaps, I'm wondering, my question is, that sense of annihilation, is that something that maybe underrepresented groups really can grasp in a way, and so perhaps there's an understanding of what nuclear war means because they have already experienced that kind of annihilation in a different way, of course.
Well, I mean, Ardeth, do you want to speak to that? Do you want me to?
Go ahead, Gina.
Okay, well, I would say that most communities of color understand that. Especially in this hemisphere, but all over the world, that unless they could be of profit, they were going to be annihilated. Annihilation has been used as a tool of torture and of systematic disenfranchisement, right? I mean, when you think of Native American peoples or indigenous peoples in different countries and the colonization of those countries, the way in which predominantly white people have shown their power is with the use of the gun and to literally wipe out or annihilate whole communities and sectors of populations. So yeah, I definitely think, depending on how you contextualize it, that people of color and disenfranchised people can have a deeper understanding around what that means because they've been facing it for hundreds and hundreds of years, centuries, depending on what part of the world we're looking at. I think that, scarily enough, the science should really speak for itself. I think that after what happened in Nagasaki, which that anniversary is also on the 6th of August, which shares the date of the 55th anniversary of the Voting Rights Act. When we think of what happened in Nagasaki and Hiroshima, we can see the devastation that one bomb brings. And so that is an ongoing experience that I would hope people would learn of that history and understand that more specifically and clearly. I had mentioned earlier, that I had done a play very early on in my career called Vivers, which was about a group of young people who went to the deepest, they were on a trip to the Bronx Zoo, and it just so happens that the deepest point in the train station in New York City is at that location. And at the time of the school trip, there was a nuclear blast. And so this play takes place 10 years later after what we were told is called a nuclear winter. And so I bring it up just to say that, it's really in the science of it all that we really need to pay more attention to. And, as it relates to the environment, I feel like we need to pay more attention to the science there as well. I just, and especially with this administration, I have never been more afraid of the possibility of annihilation because of misinformation and a bad understanding on the administration side, but also the inflated ego and narcissism that resides in that space. That if, just feeling the wrong way, they just might, press the button. Like, what the hell? Let's just see what happens. And there's no retreat from that, right? So, of course, I think all of this conversation leads to not only policy, but also voting. And I would hope that everyone on here is not only registered, but will exercise their right, whether they believe in the other candidate, shall we call him. I really hope that, we'll just take it for the team this time, and then we can get into the real work after that. But we've come to a point and a moment where we really have to think about not only the annihilation of certain communities because of racism and fascism in that way, but also the annihilation of the entire planet and globe as it relates to the climate and the nuclear proliferation of us all.
Right. Ardeth, could you?
Yes,
Sure.
Thank you so much, Heidi. What I wanted to say about it is when I was 4 years of age, I can remember we were doing the practicing of hiding under our desks. I was a kindergarten person in Lansing, Michigan. I can remember it so clearly. I can remember the times when all of the lights had to be turned off in the entire city and it became a blackout. And then I can remember later on in life, at 1978, I was at the United Nations. There was a disarmament conference, and the Hibakusha had come to New York, and they had the pictures of Hiroshima and Nagasaki.
And just to explain that the Hibakusha are people who lived through Hiroshima and Nagasaki.
The ones still living, but many of them showing the scars. And then at one point, the bells sounded and we had a die-in. And Sister Carol and I were so privileged because the Japanese people were lying over us. Our bodies were over each other. And they were passing out gifts to those that they could reach. They had brought with them the pictures of the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki and the pictures of the people who had been burned, who had been, the pictures of the shadows of the people, the total devastation. These affect any human being. It affected me when I was practicing for this total destruction. And then when finally I was experiencing it right with the people who had been there. So to me, annihilation was clear, even as a child. I also was brought up in a little German community, and so I can recall all of the effects in that German community. People who still spoke German, who then changed their language to English as quickly as they could because of World War II and what was affecting them. I mean, I was 9 when the bomb dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. But, you know, as I lived in the community and we went through World War II, I can just recall the effect on the German people who thought they were going to be taken to internment camps, as the Japanese were in the United States. So annihilation is Mother Earth killed and the people killed. Today, it's omnicide. Today, it's the death to all. I mean, we know infanticide, we know fratricide, we know matricide, we know the sides, we know the killings. But when we speak today of 100 seconds to midnight, which the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists have spoken about, we know because of the computerization, because of the nuclear weapons and the power of weapons, it will be a total devastation, a total annihilation. The planet will be gone. In the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists, it's very clear that a nuclear bomb is immediate death. But in climate disasters, this 10 to 12 years because of the emissions and because of the destruction through climate change, they're talking in terms of also an annihilation of a movement across the earth day by day by day that is destroying Mother Earth. All the violences are connected in all of this, whether it be sexism or racism, whether it be any of the phobias, whether it be the poverty, whether it be militarism, every violence affecting humanity today, every one of those violences are connected to one another. And so my position is, you know, as people, we have to learn new paradigms as it relates to climate, as it relates to the treatment of people who are oppressed, as it relates to people in poverty who are suffering from malnutrition and death dealing, whether it be in the war zones, whether it be from all the contamination and pollution, which comes certainly, I mean, nuclear power is not the answer, so we have to look at new paradigms in all of these issues of violence. And so therefore we must learn nonviolence as a way of life, and we have to learn nonviolence so strong that we're willing to do resistance as a way of life. And I'll stop after this statement. Just realize everything of the directions right now in the pandemic and the death dealing because of the lack of health care. I mean, just think of the death dealing in every one of these, from the lynchings, from the, you know, all the death dealing by police, it's just the direction is such that the paradigms that we design now must be a unity together, all of humanity, in behalf of life in every one of these issues. And it's a challenge before us, you know, to live this life of concern and care for the earth and for humanity.
Well, Ardeth, I really honor your words because I think that they're very profound. And I also feel like when you were speaking, it brought to me like it seems like the times are coming to a head. And it seems like all these issues, as you say, throughout the history, seem to be tied together because they've never been resolved. As Gina was saying, you know, reparations and things like that. It just keeps layering on and piling on and piling on. It seems to be coming to a head where it's all seems to be coming together. And you know, I honor you so much because you're still so active. I mean, I read about your time in prison and the things you've done and worked so hard and how, you know, I'm very curious just to know a little bit more about you and about what you are planning right now to do and what you can inspire young kids to do and anybody to do to move forward. And because I think sustaining this movement and all of these movements coming together is something that I'm really excited about, honestly, to have it all come together.
Can I add something to that? You know, of course, Ardeth, talk about whatever you want to talk about, but these are some things that we both eagerly want to hear you say, which is, I'm urgently concerned, of course, about every issue we're talking about. Urgent, urgent. You know, we must manage to take care of this. But I'm also concerned about the tremendous lack of knowledge about nuclear weapons. And it is something we really need to be aware of and know about. If you don't know, you're not going to do anything about it, right? That's sort of, as an educator, it's sort of fundamental to what I do, which is if we don't know, we're not going to act, right? So with racism, if you don't know, which is a big problem with a lot of white people, they don't know. So they need to educate themselves. And that's that's one of the points we're at right now with racism is white people, you guys need to go figure this out. And there's a lot of books and there's a lot of information. And so I feel the same way, you know, obviously in context about nuclear weapons. People just don't know. And what do they need to know? You've gone to prison for this. You've spilled blood literally on nuclear weapons and put your body on the line and spent a lot of time in very difficult situations because you feel so urgently about this. Why?
Well, I came to a point where I recognized the fact that nuclear weapons, actually immediate, is endangered every minute of every day, either by accident or by intention. The instability in nations today. I mean, you can't really talk about nuclear weapons, you know, changing at all until you talk about the connections with every one of these other violences because it's so deep within it. I mean, just think about our government today. All the isms are before us. You know, the president talks about nationalism, militarism, imperialism, colonialism, racism, sexism. I mean, he has not learned yet, or the politicians have not come to the awareness of humanism. They don't feel the pulse beat of what is happening to Mother Earth and to people. So until you can build those relationships within the minds of people, nuclear weapons for them is something that can be threatened, a trigger at the head of these enemies every day. And they trigger, they target the enemy, they make the enemy for us, and then they target the enemy. And normally it is racist. Normally it is built totally on a relationship of profit. Not the prophet we want to be, but the prophet for the nation, for our materialistic, consumeristic culture. So, you know, I'm not gentle with the government of the United States. And that's why I do what I do regarding nuclear weapons, because I'm trying to stop the crimes of the United States government. I try to stop it in every one of these issues, but predominantly because the world will be aborted with a nuclear weapon being used. And this president, every president except Jerry Ford, has threatened to use nuclear weapons, because every nuclear posture review that has been designed in all the presidents since Truman, every president says by any means necessary. And because nuclear weapons have grown to be the most powerful, dastardly weapon, most destructive, therefore, that's the force that is threatened to be used. And then we have come this close multitude of times for use of them or for accident. So if you read the book Command and Control of Eric Schlosser, you will see all the way through the threads of how many times we've come close to Holocaust, close to that omnicide. So my heart stirs in passion to do this treaty that must be upheld, to get these 9 nuclear nations to a point where they understand you are committing crime by threatening to use a weapon of mass destruction that will commit crime against men, women, and children, disarmed men, women, and children, people who are non-combatants. This is criminal. Every treaty we've signed, from Geneva to Hague to the NPT. So 50 years ago, we signed a treaty that said we will get rid of all these nuclear weapons. All 191 countries signed it, and we signed it, and we ratified it.
We know how good the United States is around keeping their word on treaties, right? I mean,
I have hope in this one because, you know, we are really strong regarding the treaties of biological weapons and chemical weapons. We are very strong regarding landmines. You know, I mean, the president now is different. He's talking about, you know, redoing all of this. He's talking about testing nuclear weapons again. He's talking about creating landmines. He's talking about, you know, doing all of the absolute opposite. But these treaties have been upheld: biological, chemical, cluster, and landmines. This is the last category of weapon of mass destruction. So, you know, let's face it, we've been working on this so many years. And you're right, the Native American treaties have not been upheld. You know, a lot of the laws of the land have not been upheld, but that's where we come in, because to answer your question, Dennis, I have faith in grassroots movements, climate right now, you know, Extinction Rebellion, Sunrise, you know. I was with Greta Thunberg. She gave me a lot of hope. I watched her. I listened to her when she did the die-in at the White House, you know, and I have hope in what is going on as it relates to racism. I mean, the Black Lives Matter gathering that was in DC, there were 40,000 people years back when I was still living in Baltimore. And being present, you know, all the old time civil rights people were present, but the young people took over the stage from Mr. Sharpton, Reverend Sharpton, and they are the ones that started Black Lives Matter. They are the ones that, you know, it's their time to create the movement, and they're doing it. And then there's the work, the poor people's campaign. I mean, 40 some states are organized to take on from the poorest of the land the issues of these times regarding poverty and unionization and the right to have a job and the right, you know, the right to work on all these other issues, the right to vote. So we have movements going on now. The only movement that's not there was there in 1982 when 1 million of us were in New York City. But the movement for nuclear weapons is going right now in the process of the treaty, which will abolish all nuclear weapons. I mean, there will be work after it. So the movement will be stronger once the criminal activity can be seen, I think, by the people.
Gina, do you want to jump in? Because I know we don't have you for that much longer. So if people have questions for Gina, I mean, we have questions, but feel free to post them. Linda Pence-Gunter makes an important point, which ties into the racial issue, which she asks, when you see those pictures of Nagasaki and Hiroshima, it seems like the most powerful argument against the development of weapons, and of course the use of nuclear weapons. But since we still have 14,000 nuclear weapons in the world, do you think it was a racist response that somehow those victims in Japan didn't matter. They didn't move then. They didn't move the world then to ban nuclear weapons. And another, I want to add to the racist piece, which is 67 nuclear bombs were tested, meaning exploded, in the Marshall Islands, the native people there. And they're still suffering the repercussions of that. So there's a lot, and where uranium is mined is in native communities.
Right, because people of color are expendable. We're expendables, you know. And I see that there was a comment in the questions about the vote and Native Americans, and I just want to say that you know, there's so much to look at on a ballot. It's not just the presidency. And I am about folks really taking a good hard look at local races and local elections and local issues, because that is where I think we as a community can begin to re-enfranchise ourselves. But I would say to the Native American community that, you know, I would want you to be an ally, not, you know, this is not certainly a demand or a request of anything, but I would hope that you would support those of us who are trying to create a space and a world where we can be accountable for all that has been done against any peoples. And so that we can really get into what real, honest, equitable reparations look like for all of us. And, you know, our Native and Indigenous brothers and sisters globally have a lot to offer that we keep discounting. And sort of like what I said about the arts, in terms of the arts being sort of like the first thing to go, because there's so much power in the arts and the way in which the arts can communicate messages. There's so much power in the ancient and not so ancient practices of Indigenous and Native tribal strategies and communication, and the way in which they care for their elderly and their planet and each other, that of course, you know, we need to get rid of that, because we can't exploit if we take on the practices of Native and Indigenous people. They're not about exploiting anything. From what I have learned from my relationship to Native and Indigenous peoples and cultures. So I would say to any Native brother and sister that yes, I am asking you if you have the capacity to go and vote, because we need a course correction right now, more than I think we've had ever in my lifetime, certainly. And the civil rights movement and other movements are deep testimony to the power of the vote and the way in which we can make a shift and a change. And I think that should the Native American community en masse show up as using their vote as resistance in some way, that it would be an extremely powerful alignment. And while I certainly do not have close to really any answer, I just have ideas and hopes and dreams around creating strategies that I'm hopeful will lead us to a more equitable space, since we are all together inhabiting this planet that is like, you know, as not that I really want to bring up or quote Gloria Steinem in this moment, but she does often talk about there's just one mothership and we're all on it. And the one mothership is this earth, this planet, this place we call Mother Earth. And if we don't really figure out the ways in which that we can take care of it, then we really don't know how we can take care of each other ultimately. Because just like we say in the movements that for Black lives, or in the movements for transgender people, or for the movement for Native and Indigenous peoples, if we don't start listening to them and look to them for leadership and look to them for the way forward, then there will be no real equitable way forward, period. And I feel the same way about Mother Earth. and respecting Mother Earth. And it's if we don't find a way to actually heal this planet and not try and find ways to destroy it, then we will not find a way forward.
And I could address this real quick because I see the person asking the question is also saying, I would hope that he doesn't feel like Native people voting is taking away from their own sovereignty. I feel like Native people some people have the opportunity to vote either place. They can vote. They can vote in the United States election, or they can vote in their sovereign nation election. So I think it's important. I think that, I don't want to, Gina could say if she wants to, but the way I feel personally is just voting expresses your voice. And so if you can vote within your own nation and elect your leaders, and those are the people that can represent the Native nation to the world. And I feel Gina's putting her heart out there and asking us all to come together.
Yes, 100% though. And again, I can't tell you who to vote for.
Right.
I just think it's important for us all to be as active as possible. And so I would agree, yes, in your sovereign nation, use your vote there if that's the way in which your community exercises its rights.
Yes, and let's use that to come together. That's the way I feel. Do we have, I think Gina has to leave soon.
I wanted to just say one more thing to Gina and thank her, because I think the points she's making and bringing together are really, really incredible. You also worked on the Women's March. Last I saw you, you were just about to launch that. If you would just maybe bring that into this conversation before you go, I would really love to hear about that.
Sure. So I was asked to participate, strangely enough, in the first Women's March that we had for a lot of what we're talking about, because a lot of the women that were organizing the march were white women. And so I was asked to come on board as a woman of color to help strategize and organize the programming around such a day, so that other voices could be heard, so that we could acknowledge our Indigenous brothers and sisters, our Black and trans and LGBT community, and also to make sure that there was platform created for women who don't identify as white, shall we say. And it was a really awesome and amazing opportunity. I ended up working on all three of them. I emceed the Los Angeles Women's March all 3 years so far. And it's a very interesting space. But, power is kind of nutty when people get in a position of power and what they feel like they want to contribute or how they want to do it. And, we keep saying that you need to lead from the voices of the most disenfranchised and from the most marginalized, because there lies the answers. And so we would hope that they would do that. But one of the things I also want to bring attention to is a piece of art that I'm so grateful to have been a part of. And it was in collaboration with an organization called For Freedoms. And we looked at the artwork of the traditional artwork of an artist by the name of Norman Rockwell, who often created art that was often depicting people of working class people, or let's just say predominantly, working class people. It would be like a kid in a barbershop chair, or it would be, a family around a Thanksgiving table. But a lot of his subjects, and most of his subjects, were white people, even though he was depicting sort of the Americana look. So we took these drawings, and a certain series in particular where he was requested and commissioned by the president at that time to create illustrations around 4 freedoms, FOUR freedoms: freedom from fear, freedom from want, freedom to worship, and freedom of speech. And he created these illustrations around that, and the president at that time used them and sold them as postcards and other things for war bonds, to create war bonds. And so we felt very specifically that we wanted to take these images and create images of peace through them. So we recreated the exact tableaus in those very famous posters, and we depicted them with the illustrations of the diversity of our communities. And one of the images was felt to be so powerful, the way in which we restructured it, that we got the cover of Time magazine for it, and it was freedom of worship and freedom of religion. And I think because it was so strong was because we put front and center in that picture our Native and Indigenous peoples. And we put a real diverse group together of how people see religion, spirituality, and practice. And so I'll just leave you with that. They're beautiful images. I encourage everyone to see them. I encourage everyone to really look at sankofa.org more deeply and see what we do, and to stay tuned. We also have just launched something on Instagram called The Voting Guide. And it is a voting guide for people for every state in America, for the more traditional democratic process. So I invite people to take a look at that. And again, I want to thank you for having me here. And I hope everyone has a really blessed rest of your conversation and day.
Yes, thank you so much for being with us.
Take care, everyone. And Ardeth, I just want to thank you so much. You're such an inspiration, and I really, really appreciate all the very hard work and putting your body on the line for us. And I hope everyone will be inspired by your legacy and what you offer to us. So thank you.
And Gina, I realize we are in this together. I know that your dad and myself, that we were in it together, and that we will continue to be always together wherever we are, because we have a passion over bringing about the better world. That's what's important.
Thank you. Peace, everyone.
Thanks, Gina.
Peace.
Stay safe. Thank you so much for coming on. So so that was great, and so now we can focus a little bit more on some of the things that you've done, Ardeth, which I think would be truly, you know, when I first heard it, I thought was remarkable. One of the stories that you told me was about taking blood, your own blood, and putting it into baby bottles and spilling it on, I believe, nuclear weapons, or certainly on something at a nuclear facility, and then of course you were arrested.
Yes.
Could you tell us about that and why you would do that? What is the symbolism of that? And were you afraid? Were you not scared to go to prison? Like, what made you, how did you do that?
Just realize that there have been over 100 plowshare actions, and that's the two symbols we use in it are our own blood, pouring out our own blood, and also hammers. They shall hammer their swords into plowshares, their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift up sword against another nation, nor shall they train for war anymore. So that's Micah and Isaiah speaking to us, telling us in this Old Testament that we have to begin to do that. And so communities of people have done it. And Sister Carol and I and others from religious life, but lay people have done this through the years. In fact, today is the anniversary of the Transform Now plowshares. And yesterday was the anniversary of Carol and mine and two others, Kathy Boylan, with whom we live now, and Liz Walters. We were part of Weep for Children plowshares. So we name the name, and we go to a deadly force site. Right now, Kings Bay plowshares are before the courts. They're facing years in prison. And so through the years, we don't want to take extra credit for it. In our 4 plowshare actions, we spent some years in jails and prisons throughout this country, but we did before that just doing direct action at nuclear sites. So when you try to hold the government accountable for the crimes that they are committing, they take it very seriously. And the judges also are in collusion, therefore, in putting us away because they disallow the laws of this land to be our defense in these cases. So it's just really important that people understand it's much more than ourselves. But
Sure.
maybe that's what led me then to come to the work on the treaty, because I want to go through the treaty, at least briefly, and tell people what they can do with it, because it is the first treaty that will abolish all nuclear weapons. And it will not allow a use, a threatening to use, a testing, anything. The prohibitions are to get rid of all of it, because nuclear weapons can never be used legally, morally, ethically, and they cannot be threatened to be used anymore. So a general, is it all right, Heidi, if I go ahead with the treaty?
Please tell us all about the treaty.
Okay, there was a General Assembly in 2016 that kind of mandated that the United Nations gathering come together in order to prohibit nuclear weapons, also with the intent to eliminate them totally from the face of the earth. So Elaine White Gomez, who was from Costa Rica, was the ambassador who led as president the gathering. Terrific woman, knew how to facilitate, knew how to bring all the groups together when there was any kind of conflict. Secondly, there were civil societies. The civil societies were made up of the Hibakusha, people from the Fiji Islands, from Marshall Islands, people from the scientists, the Red Cross, Red Crescent, the lawyers were there, experts from all over. The Hibakusha were prevalent because they had told their stories to the ambassadors, and so there was a lot of a flavor of this has happened before in 1945. This may never happen again. So the General Assembly met in March, June, and July 2017. The chambers were filled, the ambassadors were present, and the civil societies were present. Now, the United States, the nuclear nations also boycotted that. So just to be honest, they took with them the NATO nations. We didn't mind because it gave us an opportunity to really work together finally, because the United Nations had met before. They passed a treaty, 191 nations ratified it, saying they would get rid of all their nuclear weapons, and any nation that did not have nuclear weapons would not create them. But what happened is they didn't keep that treaty over 50 years now. So this treaty was put in place in order to move it along. We met 6 hours a day, those 4.5 weeks in the General Assembly with the ambassadors who worked on a first draft. Then we in the civil societies, led by Beatrice Finn and also David Hoekstra and Tim Wright, who were really key members who facilitated us. We met with all the experts. We met with all of the other groups. The faith groups were all present, every faith tradition. All of the scientists, the experts, the physicists, the people who knew nuclear weapons. We would meet about 3 hours a day, sometimes also at night, usually also on Saturday and Sunday. So there was this assertive way of trying to reach each one of the ambassadors in the midst of this. Every word of the draft, every paragraph of the draft, the preamble, the prohibitions, and the way the treaty would be worked out. By the way, it went from a conference to a treaty pretty quickly. And so it was an ongoing work on a treaty to eliminate nuclear weapons. So as we worked together, we then took the month of April, going back to the governments, trying to get their okay regarding the work that was going on, and then came back in June and July, and during that time worked very intensely on 2 more drafts. As I said, wherever there was conflict, and you should have heard the ambassadors from Iran, the ambassadors from these different countries that we are now negating. I mean, here we had the best treaty that has ever been made, which is called the JCP Plan of Action, POA. So that joint action was with the Security Council, and it came before Iran, and it was working perfectly before that treaty was monolithically decided to be eliminated. So going back then to, the thought of this treaty that will abolish. When these folks worked through those conflicts with each other, any word or any phrase, it came out as a profound prohibition that includes these words in it. It says that to prohibit may never undertake under any circumstances to develop, to test, produce, manufacture, otherwise acquire, possess, stockpile, transfer, or receive the transfer or control over, use, threaten to use, which is deterrence. That's how the government uses that word. Assist in, encourage, or induce anyone to engage in any way or to receive assistance to engage, to allow any stationing, installation, or deployment in their territory. So just think about those words. The most important ones to us, of course, are first of all, the word possess. Cannot possess nuclear weapons, which means a total elimination. Cannot threaten to use, which means the governments can no longer use that myth of deterrence. As you know, most of this is built because of jobs, because of the ongoing industries in the nuclear nations. But now we know that China, for example, does not really want nuclear weapons. I mean, China has laws that say they will never first strike. They will not use a nuclear weapon as a first strike. Secondly, that they will never use a weapon on a non-nuclear nation. So here we have, in our nuclear posture, we have first strike, first use. The president this year has even said that he would use it on non-nuclear nations with conventional weapons. So it's very destabilized time in this country. This is the opportune time. And so my plea with the people is to go online under the term ican.org. Or if they want to look at the United States organizing, go online to nuclearban.us. And in these two places, you will see all the work that is being done. Money is being taken out of lending institutions, investment firms, in individual banks if they have anything to do with nuclear weapons. So there's a total divestment going on. Cities are divesting. You can get your city to divest. Every mayor is on record now supporting this treaty. They did it at their last meeting. We've done it before regarding nuclear weapons. They know that the money going into nuclear weapons, $6.4 billion have been spent on wars since 2001. Just think of that. $6.4 trillion has been spent on the wars that we have been engaged in. Nuclear weapons, right now we're spending trillions of dollars as it relates for the maintenance of nuclear weapons, and now $2 trillion or $1.7 trillion is set aside to build nuclear weapons in the air, in the oceans, and on the land. The carriers and the warheads are being improved. So we're spending the money of the people. So we must get our cities and our states to divest. We must study all the ways that we can defund militarism. So right now before Congress, they just offered, Sanders, Warren just offered to move 10% of the military budget in behalf of the needs of the people. Well, evidently, the politicians don't have enough strength behind them or enough courage to do that. Barbara Lee offered to move $350 billion from this year's Pentagon budget to the human needs. It has to come because these issues are very deeply connected with each other. So people can act. People can go on the ICANN website and see what the young people are doing all over the world. All of ICANN, 570 groups of people in 103 nations, mostly young, but with their older mentors, are working for this treaty, which is called the Treaty to Prohibit Nuclear Weapons. It's TPNW. It is right now in process. We already have 82 formal signatures. Only 50 are needed for this to be enforced. We have 40 ratifications of this treaty. It's ahead of schedule for us because the pandemic has really set us a little bit behind because we can't go in person to all the nations. But it will come, 10 more. Once it is enforced, it has to be laid on the table for 90 days. But once it is enforced, every nuclear nation will have the pressure. Otherwise, they will be disobeying international law, will be under pressure to do a plan of disarming every nuclear weapon. Now you say, well, are you sure it's going to happen? I'm sure it's going to happen because I am with young people on a daily basis. We have spoken throughout this country. The only reason you don't see the people in the streets is because our government has tried to keep secret this treaty, this ban this bomb forever, because it is a waste of money. It is a threat to the nations making enemies. It is a dehumanizing thought that you would ever use it. And threatening to use it is like a gun to the head of the people. So this is what we're working on, and we will continue to work until we have this in force. And after that, as long as we live, we will continue to work through direct, political, and judicial action. Read Gene Sharp's book because a campaign to ban nuclear weapons will be in process. The political, we will pressure every politician in every forum of anyone running for offices as time goes on. Do you support the treaty to ban nuclear weapons? In doing so, we will save the earth because the military is the greatest polluter of Mother Earth. They don't know what to do. You know, once the uranium comes out of the ground, they don't know what to do with the nuclear power waste. They don't know what to do as they continue to frack and destroy the water. We need renewable energy. We need sustainability. And we know that that movement is in process. So while we're doing any movement, whether it be racism or poverty or any, take the signs regarding nuclear weapons along with you, because in doing so, you will show the relationship of the issues of these times for the preservation of Mother Earth and for all of God's people.
Well, Ardeth, I think that's absolutely beautiful. And I very much support your words. I hear your words, and I think that I'm hoping that a lot of young people out there and all the people listening to us are listening to you carefully, because I think I'd like to, if it's okay with you, just cover a couple of the questions that people asked, if that's okay. Um, I have a question here, and we spoke about how all these movements were kind of coming to a head, you know. And so this person wants to know, and maybe you see it happening, and I'm hoping that you do. It says, how can all of these movements coalesce to neutralize the power of the eco-suicidal ruling class? I'll let you handle that.
I think we need to, as our COVID allows us to, with mask and distance, I think we have to go into the streets with the movements. You know, when Greta was here, people were in the streets. You know, we've been to many of the climate change demonstrations. Go into the Black Lives Matter demonstrations. And as we do, as we join them and we affirm them, then too, they will see our own relationship with militarism as part of the problem. So, you know, it's just, Sister Carol's here with me too. And she really wants me to talk in terms again of those isms, you know, because that white supremacy, you know, that capitalism, that consumerism is very much a part of this. You know, when we did Fire Drill Fridays with Jane Fonda, we did 11 of 14 as we were arrested an ongoing time here at the Capitol and on the streets. You know, she brought out very, very clearly, she says, I will not buy another piece of clothing in my life. Now that taught us, and people will say, yes, she has a lot of clothing, but that stance is exactly, we have to look at what we have in the consumeristic society that we live in. We have to see our relationship with people in the rest of the world. I mean, I think every day of all these people at the border, refugees who have nothing. When we're in jail and prison, we have nothing. You know, we don't have to live without, you know, having anything, but we do have to see how our consumerism affects the rest of the world and how all the trade, you know, destroys and pollutes, etc. I mean, we really have to see the relationship of these violences one with another. And as we do, our own lives can take on a clearer relationship with Mother Earth and people, and our systems have to be redesigned, and especially our economy, so that the 1% do not have the major wealth and the rest of people one little paycheck, the workers, the hard workers, one little paycheck away from poverty. We saw it when the cars lined up to get food. We know it's true because we know the data.
I think that's a really important message about capitalism, and I thank Sister Carol for bringing that up. You know, I mean, we do a lot of wasteful consumption, and that contributes to a lot of the problems that we have. You know, and so I think that's a really, you know, not that that's the solution for us. You know, it's not only an individual problem, but we do participate in it. There's a really good question here I wanted to ask you that someone asked, which is, how can we link the defund police movement with the defund nuclear weapons movement?
I missed the first word there. How do we?
My speaker must be not.
Yeah, your speaker is a little vague to me.
Oh, that's not good. Is this better? I hope. Oh dear. So how can we link the defund police movement with the defund nuclear weapons movement?
Well, they're deeply connected. They're connected more than ever because the police are now gaining the military industrial complex weapons and tanks and all of that. And so many of the police forces are trained in Israel. to do because they claim, you know, they're stronger and that they can do a better job. There's a very close relationship in the sense of the use of assault rifles and, you know, all of the guns on the streets and all of the guns in the military industrial complex. So they are united. Every issue of death dealing, of violence, is united with the other. So we have to get the political people to learn this. When we go to forums for the people who are being elected through the years, we always have to ask these questions to see what their stance is. You know, is their stance in support of police doing all the work that they're doing today with mental health, with domestic violence and so on, when none of them are trained? Take those funds and put those funds in what is relevant. Take the funds from the military budget. Our budget in the United States is bigger than the first 7 nations below it, including China and Saudi Arabia and Russia and England and France and all, you know, all the way down the line, India. Our budget is way beyond, it's bloated beyond control. And so we have to bring it back to a semblance of what police do. And we have to look at the military and think about conscientious objection, training people for diplomacy, getting rid of this force against nations rather than working with nations to help and benefit what really brings national security, which is the basic human needs and earth needs. It is not force and killing.
Yeah, and I think there's a question about, you know, they say, doesn't this pandemic clearly demonstrate that it is healthcare, housing, and food security, and not trillion-dollar weapons rusting in their bunkers that provide true security? And I think what you just said was just so to this point, that if we're not spending all of that money and we're not wasting all of that energy on these trillion-dollar weapons, as they say, then we can use that money for those purposes.
3% of the military budget could cure all the hunger of the world.
3%.
3%.
Right.
See, that's what we have to get to. Everybody asks this question: what brings national security? And every country asking that question will have the same answer. It is basic human needs. It is making a living that supports a family. It's education, it's housing, affordable housing, it's food, quality food, healthy food. You know, it's healthcare. It's the basic human needs that every human being needs. It's taking care of
clean water, air.
Pardon?
Clean water and air.
Water, air, absolutely. And what's contaminating that? Those things cause death.
So I think we have to come close to an end now, but I think what we're talking about is finding common ground, right?
It's common ground in relationships, building relationships in the movements of people, and walking together and not being afraid of giving our lives in behalf of the next generations. I think all of us older people have to say, yes, let's make a better world for the future.
That's great. Great.
Wow. Thank you so much, Sister Ardeth. That was inspiring. It's been an absolute honor to have you, to have Gina, Heidi, and Dennis. Thank you so much. That's you know, and people are already saying thank you. You're tremendous. We're getting great feedback. So yeah, I know we're all going to meditate on some of the incredible things you said this evening. And wrapping up, just to let you guys know that next week is the last in our series. This has been a great series. You can find all of these videos on our YouTube page, which I put in the chat, as well as our flowableangels.com, where once the series is done, we'll post that under distance learning. And next week we have Lila June joining us, who's an Indigenous musician, scholar, and community organizer. and J. Drew Lanham, who's an author, poet, and wildlife biologist, and they will be speaking on environmental justice, racism, activism, and artivism. Same time next Tuesday. We'll see you there.
Be with you.
Thank you again. Thank you.